LOOPcast. We are live now at the LOOPcast, and we are Pogo free. And unfortunately, we're also Erica free. But we're going to make up for it by having a Tinfoil Tom here. And I know you love that nickname, so I made sure to include it.
Wait, well, this podcast will go down probably as the best looking podcast in LOOPcast history. So I think that's what we can work from.
I think we can feel pretty safe about that. It's no contest, I mean, God made a few perfect heads, the rest he covered with hair.
Exactly.
Well, we're going to cover a lot of things today in the LOOPcast. We're going to talk about, the interesting Senate makeup, the shakeup in Senate races going on, how that could affect what looks like, what the next Senate will look like. Also, just dab a little bit on the latest presidential polling stuff. We're also going to talk about, Vice President Vance, made a statement, and the media just completely misrepresented what he had to say. Have we heard this before? It feels like this happens all the time. But we're also going to dive into the mailbox and ask a bunch of questions. Try to answer questions that you guys have sent along. So if you're following us live in the chat and you have a question, today's the day to ask. And so we're going to dive right into this. So I thought this was kind of an interesting thing that, obviously the presidential race gets most of the coverage, and, it's understandable. But there is a new poll. The United States Senate does matter a lot as well. And right now it's 51-49. Democrats control the Senate. But when you look at it, Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, he's been one of those Democrats that the Democrats really, really hate. He's retiring. He's not running for re-election, and the Democrats have pretty much given up on that seat. He was the only guy only Democrat that really had any kind of a chance to win in West Virginia, and he's gone. And so West Virginia is considered a lock for the Republicans to pick up. So that brings them to 50 seats. And right now, you look at the Senate races, between Texas and Florida that Republicans have to defend. Most political pundits agree that Republicans are unlikely to lose any of their existing seats. And they're already going to pick up West Virginia. So that brings us to a 50-50 tie in the Senate. And there's a lot of other races out there. There's Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, both of the, all of those. Wisconsin, Michigan probably still favor the Democrat, but there's a chance the Republican challenger can win. Ohio is becoming a very red state, but the Democrat challenger, Democrat there, Sherrod Brown, he always finds a way to win. And that's the case actually in Montana. John Tester is a Democrat who's somehow held that Senate seat for a long time. But there's a new poll that just came out, considered a reputable pollster. This poll was done for the AARP, not known for being a conservative organization at all. And they have the Republican challenger, Sheehy, at 53%, with a 9-point lead over John Tester, the incumbent. And so what this poll was kind of a shocking thing. Everyone kind of considered Sheehy to be leading in the polls, maybe by a couple of points here or there. But former President Donald Trump made a trip out to Montana, did a big rally for Tim Sheehy, and that was about a week or so ago. And we've seen the numbers move pretty solidly in his direction with this 9-point lead. If this holds, now you're talking about 51 seats. Doesn't matter who gets elected president. The Republicans, if that would hold, and they win here, they take the Senate. And so, what would that mean? Tom, there's talk here that a lot of conservatives Republicans are actually kind of freaking out with the whole Kamala momentum and stuff like that, and like, oh gosh, what would happen if she wins the presidency? Well, there's a chance that Republicans could actually take the Senate, and what would that do? I just want to throw it over to you now for a little bit of analysis.
Well, I want to go back to you mentioned. I did not know that Trump had just visited Montana right before the poll was taken, because I was informed yesterday on how every Senate candidate is running behind Trump in each of the states. So hopefully the campaign picks up on this, and he has to visit more of these states.
Yeah, but the Senate candidates like how do you say his name? Hovde in Wisconsin and Rogers in Michigan, they are trailing. Mostly it's because when you start looking at political polls, you know, I'm not trying to say I'm cooking up a stew here, but if there's a candidate that has been running and people have known about for 20 years, unless they super hate the person, they just sort of get by default. And some of these Republican challengers, like Mike Rogers in Michigan or Eric Hovde in Wisconsin, are they're trying to build up their name ID. And so if you do a poll, people are like, I don't know, and so the Democratic incumbent might be at like 48%, and the Republican challenger might be at like, let's say, 38%. And so everyone's like, oh my gosh, how come the Democrats winning by 10 points? And it's simply because people like they're asked by pollster and they don't know who the Republican candidate is, and so they just say, I don't know. And so that as we get closer and closer to the election, the you get more and more Republican voters and conservative voters will find out who these Senate candidates are, and those numbers will get much higher, and then you're talking about a real race. I think that was done by Trump visiting Montana, like I think it was like 2-3 weeks ago, really bringing that to the forefront because he was not in Montana, to try to win the state. Everyone knows Trump's going to win Montana anyway. It was all there to try to help this candidate and make a big difference.
Right, but I'm even being told, because it was a Ted Cruz staffer who's up for re-election this year. It's a tough race, even though it's Texas. But I think he's going to pull it out. But he was saying even in Texas, Trump is pulling ahead of Ted Cruz, like the polling disparity, and Ted Cruz is a known quantity there.
Right.
And even,
but I mean, how much of a difference? How much of a difference is it?
I don't know specifically in Texas. So
I think he's going to end up being just fine. But what now? There's I guess I want to get back to the other point though. Like there's some people that are like in a panic mode about Kamala. I think, like I said, it was a sugar high. I think her bounce is actually starting to fall. Her post convention bounce was not much at all. And so she's coming back down to earth. She's leading in the polls by, if you take the averages, by about 1.5%. I'm not freaking out at all. In fact, Nate Silver said Trump has got a 60% chance of winning the presidency because of the way the Electoral College is. But nonetheless, there are some conservatives who are in panic mode, and they're like, well, maybe it'd be better if she won and we held the Senate. What say you on some of that speculation and talk?
And I'm hearing way too much of that here in DC. I was at the Appaloosa Festival over this past weekend. Shout out to a great festival put on by a bunch of great Catholics. Ran into somebody who was a high-ranking Trump official. And when I told him, like, I'm panicked that perhaps Kamala can even win this thing, he goes, is that really such a bad thing? Because we hold the Senate, and the Senate can then stop anything bad that they do. And I had to point out that the Senate, name one thing, the bad thing the Senate has stopped. Congress is dysfunctional.
Right.
And there are things even in the minority that Republicans can do. But under the Biden-Harris administration, just on abortion alone, the defense travel for abortions, completely illegal. Congress has done nothing to even halt it, or other than Tommy Tuberville, to really even raise the issue. Right. Veterans Affairs hospitals, there's abortions happening there. Even more silence on that. And on Comstock is another issue where Congress could force the Justice Department to enforce Comstock. Comstock is the law that prohibits abortion drugs from being transported by the U.S. mail across state lines.
And that's not going to, the Harris administration is going to bulldoze that. I mean,
right.
And again, the Senate, you're talking about okay, well, Republicans have a pretty good shot at getting 51 seats and taking the Senate. They might even get 52 or 53. That's certainly possible. But let's also remember, if the Republicans control the Senate, you're talking about some of the Republicans are Republicans like pro-abortion Republican Lisa Murkowski out of Alaska, pro-abortion Republican Susie Collins out of Maine. They're the minority, of course. There's only two of them, and then there's some other squishes that aren't necessarily that great. But when you combine them with the 49 Democrats, well, then you're not able to get anything much done that you want. So I think it's absolute insane talk to say, oh, maybe it'd be better. You know what's better is winning. Winning is better. Winning is definitely better than losing. When you win, you have the ability to change. Like I was talking about this with LifeSite News the other day, because they're like, okay, now Trump just launched their effort to try to win Catholic voters, and I said, listen, we've expressed to the Trump campaign our frustration. We think it's morally wrong to promote and expand IVF, and so we made that clear to the campaign. We've made that crystal clear. We said that publicly. We're not shying from that. But it's also the case that at least the Trump campaign is listening to what we're saying and willing to consider different ideas or proposals that might be less harmful, or actually just focus on promoting policies that are great. The Kamala Harris campaign is not listening to Catholic voters at all. And if you want to, in fact, what do they think about pro-life Catholic voters? Well, they've been targeting David DeLayden and Mark Hawk. So that tells you everything what they think about pro-life Catholic voters. They're absolutely against everything we stand for. They would love to have us all in jail. So, I mean, to me, there's no comparison.
Yeah, I mean, all the Kamala Harris campaign wants to hear from Catholic voters is, yes, I will accept the plea deal, or guilty, Your Honor. But you're exactly right. And look, the Republican Party is kind of drifting into a space that I sometimes call pro-choice with exceptions. Makes me uncomfortable, but they're willing to sit down and talk with us. They're willing to tackle the stuff that the federal government is doing to promote abortion. And I'd rather work with people that want to work with me as we rebuild the coalition, in a sense, after Dobbs, than not work with somebody who, as you said, wants to see us in jail, and doesn't even think we should pray in front of facilities, let alone stop federal funding of them.
Right. I mean, of course, there was the woman that was praying outside an abortion mill in the United Kingdom, and they arrested her or whatever. And it's like, don't think that can't happen here in this country. There are people in our own country that are opposed to free speech. As I said last time on the podcast, former Clinton Labor Secretary Robert Reich has called for Elon Musk to be arrested 3 times because he promotes free speech and lets people share their opinions online. So all this gets back to this kind of, the Republican talk, like in the Beltway, as you say, like, oh, maybe it'd be better if we lost. Like, I don't, it just absolutely shows you what a pony show they have over there. But it's interesting to find out, though, if you look at like I say, in the last 6 or 7 days, the polling that's come out has actually swung back towards Trump. He's had a pretty steady lead in Pennsylvania, which Pennsylvania is pretty much the ball game. Pennsylvania, if you win, honestly, it's hard to see a scenario that where you can actually get to 270 electoral votes without carrying Pennsylvania. It's almost impossible for Kamala Harris. Trump, you could squint your eyes and see a way he could win a few different states and not carry Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania really is the big dog, just like it was in 2016. And the fact of the matter is, Trump has had a spate of really good polls there, where yes, maybe it's a slim lead, maybe he's ahead by 4 points, maybe it's a tie, maybe it's 1 point lead, but it's been a steady lead. And you really think, when we look back at this, I think he ends up winning Pennsylvania and the presidency, and the political pundits will look back at this and say, what a blunder that Kamala Harris did not pick Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro as a running mate. Instead, picked the socialist, good neighbor guy that yells and screams and lies all the time. I think we're...
Part of me wonders if Josh Shapiro, if it'll ever come out that he kind of demurred and said, well, yeah, why don't you pick that weird guy from Minnesota? Don't pick me, as he thinks about 2028. Because even though there's supposedly this Kamala high right now and everything else, she is traditionally a very horrible candidate. She had to be specifically placed in certain elections in California, winning statewide in California. I think she won her 2nd term statewide in California. That really doesn't prove anything, because California is kind of the fluke of the United States. So she is just an unlikable candidate. and you and I have won just as many delegates as she has in any primary. So,
Well, I mean, it is true. I think that if you're talking about a presidential candidate, somebody who's never had to have a tough contest, with the exception of maybe the time when she was running for district attorney of San Francisco, that was a legit race that she won. I'll give her credit for that. But then it's been a while. Ever since then, like attorney general of California and then running for the Senate, she's pretty much been in a lead position and not had, it's like muscle atrophy. She hasn't had to flex this kind of stuff. She runs for president 4 years ago and has to bow out before the Iowa caucuses even start. And it reminds me of Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was basically given the Senate seat in New York. Like there was no competitive primary. She went on a listening tour and it was a total coronation. And then she runs for, president, and then she hadn't run a competitive race. And Barack Obama had run competitive races before and he beat her. And so it's like, what? She was kind of caught flat-footed. And so she had 8 years to try to, go at it again. And she did. And everyone was like, well, and I've said this so many times, Joe Biden's decision not to run in the 2016 election was absolutely critical for our country. There's just certain moments where you're like, things could have completely changed, and if he would have run that time, I think Joe Biden would have won in 2016. And I'm glad that he demurred to Hillary and she ran and lost. Just like I'm glad Kamala did not pick Josh Shapiro, because I think that it might end up being the ball game. So we'll see. I just wanted to touch on that. Now, by the way, I don't know if you saw this. Speaking of which one you want, Russian tyrant Vladimir Putin was asked about who he wanted to, who he thinks would be the best person to run for president. And
if we can name a favorite candidate, it used to be Joe Biden, but now he is not participating in the election campaign, and he recommended all his allies to support Ms. Harris. So that is what we are going to do. So
it's obviously a translator for Putin.
That we should. That is why we should also do that. Well, her laugh, she's laughing. Her laugh is so fascinating. It means that everything is good, and if everything is good.
Yeah, I think we're good with that. That's just.
It means that.
I mean, if you're a foreign leader, who else do you want? You want the weakest opponent possible. I mean, I just saw the Reagan movie over the weekend as well. I guess I had a pretty busy weekend. And in it highlights how before Reagan was elected, that they wanted the peanut farmer. They didn't want the actor, because they knew even though the actor was an actor, that he was a pretty tough guy.
Well, actually, I think you make a good point with that, because, when I talk about that, like, the national media actually, just like Reagan and Trump, they treated in many ways very similar, and they're both, Trump is an actor too. He's a businessman primarily, but then he, obviously did the whole NBC show with The Apprentice and stuff like that. But the media did not take Trump or Reagan seriously, but they would broadcast this stuff like, and this is going to be absolutely horrible for the world. They're going to be completely reckless and dangerous. And so they said that about Reagan. They said he's going to start World War III. He's going to launch a bunch of bombs. If you're and the media is like, we have to say this kind of stuff to scare the voters to not do this, to make sure they pick the peanut farmer Jimmy Carter, right? That's why the media does that. They need to scare the American voters to voting, for the Democratic presidential candidate, because the Republican is the the creature from the Blue Lagoon, the scary monster, right? Well, here's the funny thing about that. The tyrants in Tehran didn't get the memo. They thought, oh my gosh, Ronald Reagan, he might bomb us if we don't release these hostages. So on January 20th, 1981, Reagan is sworn in as president. What happens? The Iranians are like, get these hostages out of here. And they release them, because they didn't know the New York Times was full of crap and was lying through their teeth. So this is one of those things where you start to realize, what is it that the media are doing to us? We need to be good media consumers and understand that the corporate media is there to spin their lies. They are, they're not referees. They're not umpires calling the balls and strikes. They want you to think a certain way. They want you to vote a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, when media first became national, I think with the newspapers, at least more broadly read, like in the early 1880s, they were created as partisan. You were Democrat, you were Republican, you were Whip, or whatever it was. They were partisan papers. The problem came later in the 19th century or the 20th century, where they decided, oh no, they declared, no, we're umpires, as you said, we're refs.
You know how that happened? You know why that change happened, by the way? I think it was better when we had partisan newspapers, where you had a Democratic newspaper and a Republican newspaper. I think that was better. You knew their bias going in. You didn't try to pretend like they're neutral and then be full of garbage. But that changed in the 1920s and 30s. FDR was so mad at these newspapers that were Republican newspapers. It's honestly, look it up, Google it. You won't even believe it. FDR would rail against all these Republican newspapers. Well, the inheritance tax was cranked up to try to push back against these newspapers. And so then, because they used to be family-owned things, it was like the family farm. You own the business, you own the newspaper in town. Well, then they had to sell because they didn't want to have to pay 30% whatever inheritance tax to their kids. And so you just form it into a corporation. And so suddenly it becomes a corporation, it becomes a business. There's no family tied to it. There's no name established to it. And it becomes, promoting the regime and the system and the government and all that garbage. I hate that, by the way.
And that's why I embrace every morning I read partisan, not just on the right, but on the left as well. Yeah. Partisan, starting with the Loop, which usually hits me at about 5:50 every morning. Just reading both sides, and hopefully somewhere I can distinguish what the truth is. Because one thing I noticed during the Trump administration, because I'd be going to some meetings as a representative, like the March for Life or Family Research Council. Well, at the time it was March for Life, and I'd be going to some meetings and reading the next day in like Politico about that meeting, and it would be total crap. It would be complete BS about what happened in the meeting. Except that is, the media just knows nobody will call them on it, so they think they can get away with it.
Well, speaking of which, the New York Times just published a story from, and they're considered the paper of record, and all the other news outlets, TV shows, and all that kind of stuff. They look at the New York Times as the one to give. They do like the bat signal. Okay, so if they publish it, then it's considered legit. These are the marching orders. They ran a story on JD Vance where he's talking about violence in public schools. And this is how the New York Times opened their story. Senator JD Vance of Ohio said on Thursday that school shootings were an unfortunate, quote, fact of life. And he called for strengthened security measures in public schools while he spoke at a campaign event in Phoenix. Okay. Amazingly enough, if you just saw that, and that a lot of people just hear the headlines, they hear the radio thing. So the AP runs a story, and here's the picture you can see if you're watching this live here. JD Vance says school shootings are a fact of life, calls for better security. Not true. And in fact, a few hours later, the AP was actually forced to correct their tweet and said, this post replaces an earlier post that was deleted to add context to the partial quote from Vance. Okay, so what did he actually say? And here's what's ironic about it. That same New York Times article, you don't even have to go that much longer. The fourth paragraph, he says, I don't like that this is a fact of life. We've got to bolster security in our schools. So the whole point is he's not saying, I don't want this to become just a fact of life. And so then the New York Times decides to run with that partial quote and saying it's a fact of life, as if he's completely callous and said, like, this is just the way it is. Absolute gaslight. They are trying to broadcast a message in his name that is 100% opposite of what he was saying. That's the very definition of gaslighting. And it is absolutely repugnant and immoral because they know they are doing this. It drives me insane.
And they don't care about the correction because more people, as you pointed out, are going to see the mistake in the first place. and also for a guy like and JD Vance is look, he's with us 95% of the time, if not more. If there is a national tragedy and JD Vance is in the vice presidential slot, or sometime in the future, God willing, he's in the presidential slot after Trump serves a second term, I want a person like that, because nobody seems to understand the family better currently in the U.S. Senate than JD Vance and what needs to be done for them. That I would hope we, as a society, we listen more to JD Vance and less to the Associated Press.
Amen to that. So right now I'd like to move into another segment here. We get lots of letters, lots of fan mail. Most people are fans of Erica, but occasionally we get fans of the rest of us. But we wanted to open up the mailbox now and take a crack at a few of these. So here we go. This time of year, everyone gets lots of emails and phone calls with political surveys. Is there any benefit to answering these surveys? Does it help proclaim to everyone that I'm voting for Trump and that I'm pro-life? Or does it work against me to have lots more aggravating calls, or worse, to get on some sort of FBI watch list? Thanks for your input. I love the show. Beth in Cincinnati. So Tom, what say you?
If you have a choice between you're cooking dinner for your kids and having to answer one of these polls, I'd say no. Because I mean, look, they're annoying you calling me at home. But otherwise, I think you should, because polls are important to certain people. I don't put much stock in them, except polls can help influence voters who are just now paying attention. So your voice does need to be heard in those polls. Not all polls are accurate. Not all polls are clean. But your voice, whenever you can give it, you should give them your time. But I wouldn't call it a priority, though, type of thing.
Interestingly enough, too, I think Democratic voters are enthusiastic about answering these polls, and they give out their, oh yeah, I support this, and they do that, and they answer it. So, the response rate among Democratic voters is much higher. Amongst Republicans,
they only have to take care of their cats, so.
But amongst specifically people who support Donald Trump, a lot of them are like, screw you, and they hang up and they don't answer. And so you're getting a response rate from Trump supporters that's much lower. So what ends up happening is that pollsters look at it and they go, they try to adjust it, I guess, or whatever, but the response rate is so low that the poll, even though the poll they might even try to be doing their best to get a good sample of the people. But if so many Trump fans are just hanging up and they're not giving them input, then you start seeing these polls like the one that came out of Wisconsin that showed Hillary was up by 16 points because the Republicans are like, forget it, and they hang up and they don't listen. And then he wins Wisconsin. And everyone's like, how did that happen? Like, well, it's because you had a shoddy poll, or because Republicans weren't answering the poll. So, all right. So another question here. My name is Jordan. I'm a biracial Catholic here in northwestern panhandle of Florida. And my question is, should we as Catholics strive to create a cohesive national identity, especially among other races and ethnicities? My family, for example, has been in North America for centuries, whether they were in chains or white sharecroppers. I take a lot of pride in my heritage. I can truly say whether or not I can truly say whether for good or for bad, I am American through and through. Well, I love that last part, through America through and through. I mean, I like to say I love my country, and I don't like to. When people talk about that, I would like to say I love my mom and my dad too. And it'd be really weird to try to tell people I love my mom and my dad, even though they made a lot of mistakes. Okay, that sounds like such a weird thing of saying it. Like, it should be natural to express patriotism. Like, yeah, I love our country. I love the United States. And if someone says, well, didn't the United States make a lot of mistakes in the past? Like, oh, you mean it's not made up of angels? Then there was lots of sin and there's lots of problems. Yeah, of course. Any country with several hundred years under its belt is going to have a lot of mistakes, and a lot of things they did wrong, and a lot of sins. And with regards to, especially, you mentioned that the person mentioned that biracial. Obviously, the sin of slavery was something that was very repugnant, and I think the United States Civil War was, the cost, the blood, the sacrifice that was necessary in a way to atone for that. So, but I think we have a lot to be proud of as Americans. Yes, we had that, but we also had Iwo Jima, and we also had landing on the moon, and we also had liberating the European continent from Nazism. So, be proud of this country.
Yeah, I name one other country where you want to be better tomorrow than you are today. Because I think from our founding fathers on, that's how I've always seen America. That we know we can improve, we recognize our mistakes, and so what can we do to improve? And on the hyphenation of Americans, because for the longest time I used to always say, like, I'm an Irish American, blah blah blah, and I think it was my dad who was just like, well, no, you're an American of Irish descent. And those are two very different things. I take pride in my country, and as you said, love it. And there are just so many great things and interesting things. And I just got back from actually I was vacationed around the same place as you were, Josh, like North Dakota, South Dakota. It is just such a beautiful country too, and diverse both in its beauty and its people. That I saw a lot of European tourists, and the realization was the main reason they're there is because they can't get that in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, looking at some of the questions in the comments, I saw Aaron. You mentioned our opinion on Robbie Starbuck prompting a lot of corporations like John Deere and Lowe's to drop their DEI thing. This is a case where, I think I mentioned this actually a few episodes ago, but Robbie Starbuck actually ran for Congress out of Tennessee. And he's an interesting guy. He's got a pretty good, strong following on X, and I like what he says. He's got, I think he's got Cuban heritage, so he understands what communism does. And he ran for Congress. Thought, it might be really great to have someone like this in Congress, and he lost. And you know what? Maybe that was part of God's plan, because right now he is just putting so many points on the board right now. He's doing so much better right now than he would if he were just one guy in 435 members of the Congress, because he is holding these corporations to account. Like, he actually just meant, he got John Deere to completely drop all of their DEI stuff. There was another corporation that he sent the message to, hey, just let you know, I'm going to let everyone know about this. And the company went proactive and, whoa, we've already changed it. We already got rid of it. So we're seeing a sea change here. I wore that Tractor Supply Company hat a few weeks ago when they announced they're dropping this kind of garbage. So all great music to my ears. I think that's great, and I think he's doing a great job. And in fact, I would recommend people follow him on X. You can even subscribe to his link there. Give him a few bucks. He's doing great work.
Yeah, and it's kind of the reverse. I think it kind of all started with Jesse Jackson, if you remember him back in the 70s and 80s. And
Yes.
There's a book called Shakedown by Kenneth Timmerman that describes how Jesse Jackson would use mob tactics, about walk into a company like Miller Lite or Miller Brewing or something like that, and just be like, awful nice company that you have here, be really bad if something happened to it. Then the Human Rights Campaign took that to a whole different level, bringing it into DEI stuff and their
scorecard, and
they have like this index just about like how gay can you be. So to see the pushback, and especially some of these companies like John Deere and Miller, and I think the Bud Light controversy last year really helped Robbie a lot as well. That learn who your constituency who's spending money on something like this? Give me a reason to go to Lowe's instead of Home Depot.
Exactly. Another comment I saw, Royce talking about the EWTN polls. We're going to have a write-up on that tomorrow in the Loop. I love the guys at EWTN, but I think, looking under, I don't want to go into too much detail. I mean, the good people there, but we just want to give that a hard look and examine it that more. So I'm going to withhold any more comment on that for now because we're still going through the analysis on that, but look forward to that in tomorrow's Loop. So thank you for that question. And then let me see.
Can I grab one? I know you're the one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because Brian Holt at 11:11 a.m. said, can you comment on the likelihood of returning to a functioning government that passes a budget, etc., instead of a bunch of executive orders? And this seems to be the podcast where I'm like name dropping or things that. Yesterday I had met with Yuval Levin. He's an ethicist. Worked in government for Republican presidents. Just a very, very smart guy. Worked up on Capitol Hill. Worked for Newt Gingrich. And he was pointing out like where a lot of the started going wrong, where Congress started going wrong, and part of it started with the Democrats, usually like mostly right around Tip O'Neill, where the Speaker of the House started seeing themselves as a parliamentary leader. And he admits that even his old boss, Newt Gingrich, drifted in that position by the end of the 1990s as well, that the Speaker, and it gives the Speaker way too much power. And what that means is those who might want to use the appropriation or the budget process to rein in the federal government from doing crazy things like the Biden-Harris administration subsidizing military abortions and things along those lines, it takes power away from the rank and file. So Congress doesn't really represent the American people as much. We need to get back to like 50 years ago, where it'll make things tougher for conservatives because if we get back to a regular budget process, that means it's going to be a lot of individual fights instead of one fight in negotiating with whoever the Speaker is or the Senate Majority Leader. But if we don't get back to that form of government, I don't see how we keep on going, because Congress right now is more ineffective than I think I've ever seen it.
Very true. I mean, in politics, they say it's just like watching going to a meat packing factory and watch the sausage being made. It's like, it's ugly. It's an ugly process, but I'd rather have that than backroom deals. Like, let's just get it done. Let's make it work. Let's get back to normal functioning government. So I'm with you on that one. Brian actually had another good question. He said, give us your thoughts on the impact of the Eucharistic Congress that was held in Indianapolis.
You want to go first on that one, or?
Well, I mean, that's one of those things where there's a lot of enthusiasm. People love going there. It was great. And they're going to go back to their communities. And I think that's good. I just wish we could have a little bit more of a discussion about, like, if we're talking about the Eucharist, let's talk about how we can make it more reverent in our liturgy. And so I think it would be nice to obviously have more Eucharistic processions and stuff like that. But if you're talking about the liturgy of the Mass, like, to me, it bothers me that we actually, so we kneel for the consecration, then we stand up, and then we like do, hey, hi everybody, shake hands. Like, why do we do this? The sign of peace, right almost immediately after we see, at the altar, the consecration. And then again, we kneel a second time. I feel like we should only kneel for the consecration. Like, that's the biggest thing. But the bishops of the United States petitioned Vatican, long ago. We want to make it more reverent by having them kneel a second time. Like, actually, I know that's what you meant to do, but I just don't think it worked. I think we should only kneel at the consecration. I don't think we should do the sign of peace so much right after that. I think we could, and again, I'm not a total trad guy, but I do believe in some more of these, a little bit more traditional things. Like, we should try to actively encourage Catholics to receive on the tongue. And actually, another thing, here's another thing. I tell my children, I do not go up to receive the blood unless it's a high holy feast day, unless it's like a solemnity. If it's the Feast of the Sacred Heart or the, Corpus Christi or Easter or Christmas. Why? Well, I want myself to never get complacent. It's not just me coming up there and, going through the motions and handing out bread. It's not bread. It's the bread of life. It's Jesus Christ, body, soul, and divinity. I don't ever want to get like it's a normal thing. I want to always try to inculcate this idea. This is our Lord. And so I don't want to receive the blood. Like, it's just a way of making me remember, like, this is Jesus we are all talking about. And so I wait for those high holy feast days. I wish that would be the norm of the church. Like, okay, now this is a special day, but we kind of make it so that all Sundays are special. Well, if every Sunday's special, then it's not special. Like, we've lost sight of that. Like in the Latin Mass, they're good about that. I don't go that often, but I like the idea of a low Mass and a high Mass. I like a hierarchy of things, not all the same. Now, obviously, I'm not saying in the current operation that it's all the same. I know that they make a bigger deal of Christmas and Easter and Pentecost or whatever, but I'm just saying it would be better to kind of, I don't know, reestablish that, like, this is a bigger deal. So that's me.
Well, I don't know what Jesuit church you're going to that you still do the sign of the peace. Kill
me, Tom.
The one good thing, one of the good things that came out of COVID was our church, and I think the priests always wanted to get rid of it, and it gave them a reason to get rid of the sign of the peace. COVID did.
Yeah.
Because it always made me uncomfortable. What am I doing shaking your hand? My concentration isn't on you. My concentration is on the Lord, our Savior. And on the Eucharistic Congress itself, yes, I wish there was better follow-up. But the people who organize the Congress, I don't think they have really a lot of control over that, because everybody is supposed to go out, and we're all supposed to become the priests and the rabbis, all of us who attended. But with large gatherings like that, I'm hoping the organizers are reaching out to people who went, because it's the beautiful stories you hear afterwards of people who were moved by then, motivated to go back and maybe help their church become more reverent and understand the liturgy better and understand the Eucharist better. I think it would be wise for the organizers of the Congress to do that and get those stories so that people like us can share them and fight back against those, say like a Cardinal Supich or something like that, who possibly thought it was a complete waste of time.
Right. And do the Eucharistic procession around Chicago. You don't want it. I mean, this guy, Cardinal Supich.
Well, I mean, they probably couldn't afford the police protection either.
Oh, thank you so much for everyone sending in a question. Obviously, we want to encourage more people to send in questions. You can send them in the chat, obviously, or you can send them to, it's at loopcast@catholicvote.org is the email. Gosh, I don't have Pogo to tell me what the correct email address is. I hope that's right. There we go, loopcast@catholicvote.org. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go a little. We're gonna go a little bit into the Twilight Zone here. We're gonna do this a little early here. So, what you got for us, Tom, on the Twilight Zone?
Well, one is mine is Conor McGregor is running for the president of Ireland in 2025. People, I do like some pro bono work for an Ireland pro family group. They were heavily involved against Ireland becoming pro abortion. Prior to that, Ireland becoming pro anti-marriage, and the one thing that just shocked me was the lack of spine in the Irish church. It gave me a higher level of respect for the American church and those who speak out on things that are important to Catholics, because the Irish Catholic Church kind of just sat that one out. The bishops kind of just sat that one out. But one, I'm bringing up Conor McGregor is because he talks a lot about the importance of family, how the Irish structure right now is not exactly conducive to the family. Ireland also, just like a lot of Europe and a lot of Great Britain, not that Ireland is part of Great Britain, are facing immigration problems. So I asked one of my friends at the pro-Irish group, and he gave like a little analysis, just sent it to me right before LOOPcast started. It's good he's willing to speak out against attacks on the family, and he's already against the hate speech bill. Because Catholic Vote has a First Amendment T-shirt, and I recommend everybody get it because we don't give enough credit to the First Amendment. Not a lot of countries have it. Except my friend points out, however, I don't believe he would share the rest of our values, and he's very much a showman. Not that America is all that adverse to electing showmen. And it certainly worked out well for us in 2016.
Right now I'm hearing Trump with an Irish accent. This is what I'm hearing.
This guy has a little less faith in that. In Ireland, the role of president is also much more ceremonial than other places. Though the last president did have a lot to do with changing the abortion law. And it was like his top priority. And my friend Adrian says if he wanted to bring the change he claims to advocate, he should instead run in the general election where he could possibly win a seat. It's hard to become a candidate because you need either 15 or 20 TDs, which are their equivalent of congressmen and senators, to nominate you, or 4 county councils, which is a big ask. So if he is serious about it, he'd have to be working on it now, working those local polling places. Well,
I think we got a clip from him talking about his faith here. Let me see if we got that here.
I am a holy man, a very holy man, Catholic and Irish Catholic, and my mother instilled it in us, and it was instilled in her, and I carry on me at all times a chain, and this chain currently that I have on is Archangel Michael. So Archangel Michael is to protect you, is to focus on good over evil. It says Love Ma on it. It says a gift from my mother, and this is Archangel Michael's sword, which is on it also. I also have another one for Saint Christopher, which is Saint Christopher is to protect you on your travels, and that was gifted to me by my children and my fiance. We're a religious family, and we trust in God and believe in God.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, again, on all these things, we got to make sure, some sort of celebrity or politician or whoever talks about their faith. We like this. We like to hear positive things about the faith, but that doesn't mean we're not going to examine your record and examine what you have to say and put you through the, the test here. But
it's one thing that the president of Ireland does, and I can never pronounce the name right, what his actual title is. It's like the Doc or something like that. He comes over every St. Patrick's Day and participates in a lot of American celebrations of St. Patrick's Day, including handing a shamrock plant over in a nice crystal bowl to the president of the United States. And one thing the president also does is the Speaker of the House hosts a lunch. And the current Speaker of the House, of course, is Mike Johnson, who does not drink. And what he was told, like, by the way, you're going to have to raise a glass of Guinness and do a toast. And Mike Johnson was notably worried about that because he's like, I don't drink. It's a pact I made, like with my church and with my faith and with my family. I don't drink. And they're here like, you have to at least take a sip or something. And then somebody pointed out to him, there's a Guinness Zero, which I never really understood, but I guess now I do. And so Mike Johnson did a toast to the Irish delegates who were there, using Guinness. Hopefully none of them knew it was Guinness Zero, because the last thing we need is
we all listen to LOOPcast. I mean, I gotta say, I've never liked the taste of Guinness. I'm sorry to tell you that.
It's a heavy drink.
It tastes like cold coffee. But that's ironic that the Speaker of the House and, if Trump gets elected, it'll be the President of the United States as well who
Oh, that's right.
don't drink. Donald Trump. I mean, he talked about that recently. There's a podcast on there where he said he never drank, and because he had an uncle who had had used and abused alcohol and had a rough go of it, and so he just realized from an early age, I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to do it. And so those are admirable reasons. I'm not with him on that, but I like to enjoy a brew. So, all right. Next up, my thing in the Twilight Zone. I mean, this truly feels like Twilight Zone. This is crazy. So there's, you might remember when you went to school, the Pythagorean theorem, talking about that. I mean, it's, like, okay, so you got a right angle triangle and 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. You're trying to figure all this kind of stuff out. And I know my listeners are like, wait a minute, I didn't know there was going to be math on this. Well, anyway, there's a conundrum. There's this puzzle that has riddled mathematicians for, I guess, centuries. That and for 2,000 years, it was a puzzle that people just couldn't figure out. And it was to try to use, I guess, trigonometry to prove the Pythagorean theorem. They've got other proofs for it in other ways, but no one had done it through, I guess, trigonometry. If I'm not getting this right, any math nerds want to correct me in the record, go ahead. But I just saw this story by CBS News, and I was kind of blown out of the water. Teenagers, these 2 teenage girls at an all-girls Catholic high school in New Orleans, solved the problem. So the teacher's like, hey, there's this problem. No one's been able to figure it out. I'll give you $500 if you get it. Each of these 2 students independently had figured it out. And they kind of confer with each other and like, yep, well, it sounds good. And they handed it to the teacher. Teacher was like totally blown away. And they're like, I think actually you might be onto something. And I think we should kind of like submit this to somebody and for a peer review and check this out. And they were right. They nailed it. Like, how crazy is this? I just get blown away by this.
I'm hoping those young ladies are getting more than just $500. I hope there's universities paying attention, even like Tulane, and just being like, okay, you get a free ride or something along those lines.
Well, they should get a free ride to Xavier University in New Orleans, which was a
this
black Catholic college, right? Yeah, right there in New Orleans. It was started by, I can't remember, was it Drexel or was it the other great saint? But anyway.
St. Catherine Drexel, I know, contributed to it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I just think this is a phenomenal story. I mean, Twilight Zone, who would have thought that some high school math teacher saying, hey, I'll give you $500, we can figure something out that no one's been able to figure out for 2,000 years. And 2 high school students, Catholic high school. I'd like to point out for the record, by the way, that Louisiana now has school choice. There'll be more students that are able to go to Catholic schools. So, hey, this is 2 thumbs up for me. This is a big win for Catholic education. So I thought it was worth shouting out about.
And also remember that Louisiana education system was in the national news recently, being mocked and made fun of because they passed legislation to allow historical documents, including the 10 Commandments, to be displayed in all the classrooms. And it's a matter of, well, maybe if we concentrate more on stuff like that and less about all this woke stuff or whatever it's called nowadays, DAEI or whatever, we'd have a few more math geniuses and a few less purple-haired I don't know what's.
That is absolutely true. Well, it's a little bit shorter a Loopcast today, but we want to thank everyone for joining us. Don't forget to like. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button. If you're listening to us on the podcast, whether Spotify or wherever you get your podcast, make sure to leave a review. Let people know about it. Share what you're doing and let us know. And we'll be back again next week with a full slate. And we'll dive into the issues once again. Don't forget to send us emails, loopcast@catholicvote.org. And as always, we ask.
And be sure to let Tom know how much you love this show, this Friday show specifically.
And as always, we ask for the intercession of St. Thomas More, Our Lady of Guadalupe, and St. Fidelis. Please pray for us in all of our work. We thank you so much. And As I said on the last episode, special intention, I would especially, again, make that call to, offer up a Hail Mary in a special way for a special intention, someone we care so much about. Offer up that prayer, especially this weekend. So thank you so much. God bless you guys, and we'll see you on Monday.